everyone, welcome to today's video. I'm gonna dye my hair today and get ready for my day, and I thought I would just talk to you. I've been contemplating the subject for a little while. Women, because the other day, about a month ago, I put out a Tumblr post based off of Rita Ora's new song, Girls, starring Cardi B and a couple of other female artists, and I had put out my love for the song. Very casual, very fun, very upbeat. Alright, I am a queer woman who rarely complains about most pop music just because I think that it's made to be enjoyed casually. I don't think that you can create solid activism out of pop music, though I will say there are some exceptions. So I thought what we would do, because of everyone's passionate disdain for my enjoyment of something so casually queer, we would dive into an exploration of what it is to be a woman and a queer woman. And so I asked some of you from the audience, from the fam bam, to submit some videos about what it means to be a woman.
As someone who is a feminist, specifically a third wave feminist and egalitarian, when I think what empowers me as a woman, it's not necessarily just my body, but the best way to describe it is the word silk. It may look delicate, it may look soft, but it has so much strength. And if you're into BDSM, it can carry a stink. And specifically for me is pole dancing. In pole dancing, some of the best moves I've seen that some dancers make look easy and graceful and fluid carries a lot of strength, and especially in your core and the rest of your body. So that's the best way to describe it for myself, and quite frankly, I love being a woman. It's the best thing ever for me.
And what it means to be a queer woman when you listen to that song.
I feel so conflicted about this song. On one hand, yay, a pop anthem about bisexual, sexually fluid exploration and loving on the ladies. And, you know, I want to kiss girls, girls, girls. I'm like, hell yes, I do. Can relate. On the other hand, it sucks that sexual exploration is still associated with being in an impaired state in order to do it. Not that there's anything wrong with rolling some J's and red wine, but, oh, I'm drunk or high, we should kiss, has been something I've experienced a lot with other women. And while it was exciting for me to experiment and figure myself out, it makes it hard to actually date women because heteronormative society only promotes the intoxicated novel experience of physical exploration with women. But as a 28-year-old queer woman that grew up in the very confusing time of being gay is taboo, and people being in awe of Britney Spears kissing Madonna and the voyeuristic fad of the band Tattoo and I Kissed a Girl, it's problematic because I've been closeted for so long and just recently came out because people treat queerdom as a novelty and it's been used as a stunt for money or for impressing other people for so long. And I'm not 50-50. I'm like 90 with the 10% reserved for the occasional socially woke, empathetic daddy. And I don't want to kiss girls sometimes. I want to kiss them all the time. And I want to date them. And I want to love them. And I want to hold their hands and to be sweet with them. To me, that's being a woman, is sharing that feminine experience and respecting all women, trans women, butch women, women of color, and treating and respecting that feminine softness with respect and dignity and just caring for it and enjoying it.
Now, in order to really understand, I think, some of our perspectives, or at least specifically my own, I need to go over some history with you. In 2003, Blink-182 released a song called I Miss You. It was a Jack and Sally-esque, literally, based off the lyrics, very dark, emo, gothic, punk at the time video. It featured a lesbian couple, if you will, or at least two girls kissing. That was one of my first exposures to queer representation in media that wasn't through porn, that wasn't through comedy skits. It was through music that I loved and really mattered to me. Around the same time in 2002, so technically before Blink-182 came out with their song, Christina Aguilera released a song called I Am Beautiful. And that song really resonated with me, not just because she was speaking from a woman's perspective, but because she represented queer people, trans people, gay couples. She represented people of color. She represented punks. She represented people who really felt ostracized. Now, I don't know if you guys were alive during this time, but it was a really nice time. I was about 14 years old in 2003, and the things that were interestingly happening then was that music was becoming more diverse in a lot of weird and unique ways because fashion was changing. For me, Britney Spears was the first woman I ever fell in love with. I had a huge crush on Britney Spears. Overprotective was like my favorite song. I resonated with it, and the dirty version of that song is like my favorite. Now, the interesting thing about that particular time is that Britney was being sold as the innocent schoolgirl coming out in the music scene about 16 after she finished her time with the Mickey Mouse Club. And what was interesting is that Christina was with her during that time. But Christina quickly became dubbed sort of the sluttier version. She was the bad girl. She had piercings and revealing clothes. This was interesting to me. At the time that Christina and Britney were popular and in mainstream media, I was a virgin, a Catholic girl, a closeted queer gay woman, and I was contemplating my existence, not only through religion, but just society in general. And though I had never had sex or experimented sexually, I somehow really resonated with Christina Aguilera. Which is sort of strange, right? Like, I had no reason to resonate with her. But for whatever reason, her owning her body really spoke to me in a way that was unapologetic. See, Britney Spears was revealing, she was out there, seductive, sexual, but for whatever reason, she was allowed to maintain her innocence, even though we knew she wasn't. So what does this have to do with Rita Ora, girls, modern time, and, well, womanhood? Women. Interestingly enough, in 2003, Madonna, Britney Spears, and Christina Aguilera get on stage. They perform a song, and at the end of the song, there is a kiss shared between Madonna, Christina, Madonna, Britney, not Britney and Christina.
I like the smell of it in Hollywood. How could it hurt you when it looks so good?
The interesting thing about this is, let's see, I was 14, 2003, and there was a shared computer in the living room of our home. I think 8 out of 10 kids were living at home at the time, and my parents were super hyper aware that, well, there were naughty things on the internet. After that happened, okay, Yahoo News, or the Associated Press, or whoever was running Yahoo's website at the time, had a picture of Madonna and Britney kissing with the headline, "Lesbian Kiss Shared Online." Now, this was a big deal because my parents were very, very religious. And they didn't want us exposed to things like that. And so for the whole day or 48 hours that the news was covering this story, we weren't allowed on the internet because my parents didn't want us to see a kiss between two women. My parents did not know at the time that I was already watching music videos, pop music videos, accessible to children through like YouTube and stuff. I was already watching that stuff online. I was already seeing these things. I had already seen porn by this age. And my parents just didn't want to either acknowledge it or they wanted to pretend that this wasn't going to be the story of their children. Now, interestingly enough, people's reactions to that interaction is what I find fascinating about being a woman. So, I don't know if everyone remembers it this way, but I remember without question of my recollection of that time, Britney Spears being dragged. Like being dragged, inappropriate, how can she, oh my gosh. Well, Christina didn't, because Christina was already known as kind of a slutty, well, and bear with me here, when I say slutty, I don't mean it in a negative context, but of course society means it in a negative context. She was already seen as a woman who owned her body, who exposed her body, and so of course, of course she would just kiss Madonna on stage and have no dignity, Britney Spears, on the other hand, not Britney, not our innocent little Britney, who made Slave for You. Britney, who literally has been half naked since she was 16. Britney. I get it. The way we view women and the way we view expectations of women is really just inside of our own heads. It's very hard for humans, I think, to take people at face value. It's why you'll meet parents who say things like, oh, this is a phase, and this isn't really who my kid is, and this isn't really who they are, and this is society forcing you to be this way. Is it society? Or is it you just having the tools to expose yourself? What's interesting, too, is that as a queer girl, I looked at that kiss and I thought, wow, 2 girls on stage, amazing. Because remember, by this time, I had already witnessed Rosie O'Donnell being kicked off national television. I remember my mom and I used to watch Rosie all the time. And then I remember that day, Rosie was out. It was known. Rosie was kicked off TV, and my mom said, never again are we watching Rosie. The early 2000s was a really rough time for gay, queer, LGBT folk in general, but we were making strides. Will and Grace had made a pretty good name for itself, and it was pretty humorous. It really changed my perspective on being a gay woman.
You were so boom, boom, boom. So tell me, how'd you like the picture?
I loved it.
You loved it.
I loved it.
You loved it.
I loved it. Did you love it?
I didn't love it.
You didn't love it.
Didn't love it.
You just lost a dry hump, buddy.
And at the time, I had strictly identified as a lesbian. Now, over time, I realized it was okay to also be bisexual, pansexual, and any other kind of sexual that your expression requires. And that's great. The thing about Will and Grace, and the thing about anything made before, well, the wokeness of the wokeness, is that there are always going to be problematic things in media. Always. Will and Grace is some of the most transphobic stuff I've ever seen. But I love that show because it really resonated at the time that it was created. And it made great strides for LGBT people, even if they were small ones. Well, and big ones. And different ones. And not perfect ones. But they existed, and they needed to exist for us to move forward. Society moves very slowly, but when it does, it's beautiful and it's worth it. In 2008, Katy Perry came out with I Kissed a Girl. And she liked it. I liked it too. It really resonated with me, and even though she had a boyfriend and we hoped he didn't mind it, it set a precedent that girls kissing girls was for or dictated by the pleasure of a man. And I still liked the song because it was still representation. And that is the hardest part of being a minority, is deciding what form of representation we want for the majority or to the majority. And then, do we ever get to relax? Do we ever get to have an enjoyable pop song that is objectifying and fun? So one of the biggest bummers to Katy Perry's I Kissed a Girl is the fact that she did have to make clear that the character she was portraying in the song had a boyfriend. And she says, I hope my boyfriend doesn't mind it. Now this is a problem, and this is kind of a stereotype that a lot of queer homosexual participants in the lifestyle, the homosexuals, have to sort of deal with, is the fact that a lot of people think the only way we can seek out affection is through stealing heterosexual partners, which is not true. Obviously. But that's what we had to work with, and that's what we have to work with. Now, fast forward to 2013 when Beyonce gave us the song Flawless. We Flawless, okay? Great, great song. Listen to it all the time. Very much my feminist manifesto. Now, it is a pop tribute to feminism, using the voiceover from a TED Talk done by Chimamanda, who is a Nigerian novelist and feminist. Now, she is a great, great voice in the feminist movement, and we will dive into her work in the future of this video. But for now, let's stick with Beyonce. So I'm going to pull up the lyrics here on my very, very interesting phone, and we're going to talk about how some of the lyrics were controversial in feminist circles. Now, Beyonce is a pop icon. She is literally so talented, sometimes I can't process. I love her. Her album Lemonade really resonated with me and speaks volumes about the art and her culture and her people and how much she loves them. It also showed, going from Flawless to Lemonade, that Beyonce had activism in mind. She wasn't someone who was pulling a 5-second stint and using pop feminism to move their albums or sell albums, okay? Beyonce really uses activism throughout her stuff. In the lyrics for Flawless, you see, I know when you were little girls, you dreamt of being in my world. Don't forget it, don't forget it. Respect that, bow down bitches. Skip, 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 skip. Bow down bitches, crown, bow down bitches, bow down bitches. There's a lot of bitches. And what's interesting enough is that some feminist circles found this to be degrading towards women. Women are constantly called bitch as a way of being derogatory towards us, usually from men, and so it wasn't a good positive word to use towards other people. Now, I would argue that Beyonce's use of the word bitch was pretty gender neutral, as she understands the hierarchy of what she's trying to sell. She's trying to sell power, and when you are on top, people who are below you are often bitches. Now, this is up for debate. I personally have no weird feelings towards the word bitch, but I do think it's the way in which it is used that matters. Context does matter. And I think in this way, it was a good way to make clear that Beyonce was in power. Throughout the song, she talks about how she's not just his little wife, and she's made a career for herself. Beyonce and Jay-Z's relationship as just an objective sort of use as an example of relationships between the power of men and women is a good example of two individuals who came to power on their own before becoming unified in the way that America would sell it together. And I would argue that instead it was just like two individuals who decided to make a life together, but you know what I'm saying? She did not dissolve into him, he did not dissolve into her. At the end of the day, they are two individuals who are making a life together. And through things like Lemonade, which is an album dedicated to Jay-Z's cheating habits, okay, they made it through. Regardless of your commentary towards the personal choices that they make with each other, they've made them. And because they're in the public eye, to some extent, we get to make public statements about them. That all aside, because I know some feminists did take issue with her staying with a cheating man, there is something to be said about people who stick by people they love and figure out how to make it work by making sure that the people who hurt them initially, Jay-Z, don't do it again. If he does it again, I really doubt Beyonce is going to stay in that situation. She doesn't need to. She literally has her own money, which means her own power, and she is not subservient to anyone. This isn't the first time that Beyonce has been in the wind. She actually did a song called Partition, which ended up getting a lot of heat because of the way that she was dressed and the fact that she was dancing provocatively for her husband, Jay-Z. Now, a lot of people, specifically on the right or Fox News or more conservative people, felt like Beyonce's, encouragement of risque clothing and behavior wasn't a good message to send to little girls. And as feminists, we have an obligation to observe her behavior and to decide whether or not it amuses the patriarchy, if you will. Now, as women in general, though, and that's not to say all women are feminists, because we aren't, but if you are a feminist and a woman, then you might see it through the guise of feminism, okay? And what that means is that your observations are made through the understanding of feminist literature. So it's not just an understanding of that women and men are equal. It's an understanding of what the concepts the patriarchy plays in your society, depending on where you are, and then what your role is as a person to either challenge that status quo or to encourage it. I think some of the issues that people take with Beyonce or Western feminists in general is they think we're fighting a ghost, as if the patriarchy doesn't make a difference in the way that humans interact with each other in the United States. As if, my mother's generation wasn't made to feel like marriage was her only option, okay? These things are important. These things set a precedent for action. It affects multiple generations. It means that every time my father speaks to me, he says things like, just marry your rich husband, though at the same time encouraging me to have my own business and make my own money, because they're still religious, so they still want me to end up with a husband, which of course might happen, sure, but life. Now, what's interesting too is that Beyonce used Chimamanda as an example of like a feminist voice because of that TED Talks. Now, what's interesting is that she herself is from Nigeria. She has a great love for Nigeria. She says it many, many times in many, many interviews. She came to the US for school, and then she talked about in a specific interview why she became a feminist. And she said essentially it wasn't because of music or culture or pressure. It was because she felt a need. Her move into feminism didn't even have a name when she started. And so some people, I think, see people like Beyonce and Taylor Swift, and they think that that is feminism at its core. I think Beyonce does a really good job of allowing pop music to talk about feminism and feminist issues, while people like Taylor Swift often will use it for the credibility without really understanding the why of need of feminism. I also do think that people stop acknowledging that there are different forms of feminism, and being a feminist isn't inherent in being a woman, and that's kind of where we're moving forward now. Do you need to be a feminist to be a woman? I don't think so. But I do think that it's important to acknowledge that your actions as a woman are judged differently than your actions of a man. It's changing, the world is shifting, and things are getting better. But to say that it doesn't play a role is ignoring the fact that many, many voices in our world, many voices that people love in great vast numbers, are still pushing narratives in which men and women should either be separated, treated differently, ignored altogether, or given different expectations of behavior because of their sex.
What do you make of the manosphere's claim that women's liberation has led to our weakened ability to pair bond the breakdown of the institution of marriage, and sexual inequity in favor of alpha men. I guess probably I would say that to the degree that all of that is true, I wouldn't say that the women's liberation movement is what's done it, because I don't believe that the women's liberation movement is the primary driver of women's liberation. In fact, I think it's a secondary consequence of a far more radical biological revolution, and that's the invention of the birth control pill. So, in terms of increasing sexual inequity in favor of alpha men, well, anything that breaks down pair bonding, matrimony is going to do that, because sexual access for males is a Pareto-distributed phenomena where a small proportion of the males get most of the invitations, let's say. And the thing that is a bulwark against that is monogamy. And part of the reason that societies are set up to be monogamous is so that that proclivity is controlled, because it's not good for children, let's say, if they don't have access to a father, and it's not good for women if they're all competing for the same men, and then it's not good for the men who aren't being chosen because they're not being chosen. And so that just seems to be a recipe for resentment and aggression, and I think the evolutionary psychology data on that's pretty clear. So don't underestimate the significance of the birth control pill. It's like the hydrogen bomb or the computer chip. It's a world revolutionary technology, and for all we know, it might do us in. In the West, the birth rate is far below replacement, and that's as a multi-generational strategy. That's an absolute dead end. And of course, no one can talk about that because, well, for the obvious reasons of egalitarianism and diversity and all of that. But the declining birth rate in the West is really, I would say, a catastrophe.
So I'm friends with a lot of people who are either outright anti-feminists, or they are people who think feminism has had its moment and doesn't need to be here anymore. So we're going to remove that concept of feminism being needed out of the narrative, and we're going to move straight into just like womanhood. What's interesting about womanhood is, regardless of political affiliations or feminist theory, you have to acknowledge that women in the US have been given different expectations of behavior, whether it's through religion or political motivation, okay? And what's interesting about that is just how it's carried on through the generations. I think one of the reasons there is huge conflict right now with younger generations, millennials if you will, is because half of us were raised by atheists and half of us were raised by religious people. I also think half of us were raised by feminists, while half of us were raised by traditionalists. And so you kind of have this rift in the youth of where we should all stand and what things really mean. See, I was raised by an anti-feminist mother, and I was raised in a religious home, and what's interesting is they talked very poorly about feminism because it was the reason that women were being promiscuous, okay? And they would tell me that as a woman I didn't need feminism. And that's true. As a woman, I don't need feminism. That's important, remember that. But it means that the way that I see the world and interact with the world has to be through some lens. So what lens was it? It was religion. Religion was my lens. How women were treated was through the guise of religion. And then how I formed my self-worth was through religion. Now, when I was 19 and I decided to leave religion, it meant that my ideas of who I was as a person needed to be challenged as a human. Okay, so a new atheist. Now that I was an atheist, what did that mean in terms of my value as a woman? And that was the hardest question to answer. So one of the ways that I found my place as a woman was by reading about women, okay? So reading about really great people, like Queen Elizabeth was cool, Joan of Arc was cool. I grew up with a lot of religious women. Judith from the Old Testament was cool. She slayed the enemy of her village, would chop off their heads. She walked through their heads, and I loved that so much. Oh my God, I want to name my future daughter Judith because I love powerful women. And what's interesting, of course, is that as a growing up Catholic person, the way I learned about women was through the guise of how God inspired them. And I recently had a conversation with my mother about Joan of Arc. And I said, well, Joan of Arc was this amazing woman who didn't need a man, and she did amazing things, so men. And my mom went, yes, but without God, Joan of Arc wouldn't have been able to do what she did. And I love it because my brother went, wait a second, what? Are you saying women without God aren't useful? That's not cool. And he's very religious. So the whole time growing up, I had this idea that the women I was learning about, the women who were strong and capable in the Bible, they were strong and capable because they were women. Yes, women of God, but they were still women. And they were doing it of their own abilities, sort of. Like, yes, inspired by God, I got that. But they were still doing it because they were the chosen ones, okay? Same as men. Like, I didn't think that it was a difference. But of course, my mother interpreted it differently, which is so interesting. Her value as a woman is, I guess, kind of all engrossed in God. The way that I interpreted that later in life was much different than how I interpreted it then. I really thought that my value was inherent in my actions. My father raised me to be a boy, which I've made a whole video on this, but I'll just very quickly. Most of my life, my dad treated me as the same as anyone else. When the women would separate, because we're Iraqi, I don't know if that played a role being Middle Eastern or what, but when the men would separate, the women would separate, and the women would go in the kitchen, and the men would go in the living room. They'd talk about politics, and my dad would be like, come here, come with me. He'd sit me down. I'd listen to all the political stuff, the news, all the stuff. And that's the way that I was raised. My dad taught me how to run a business. He taught me how to do X, Y, and Z. Eventually, when I was 21, I came out, and I was like, I'm bisexual, lesbian, woo! And my father went to me, and he said to me, I'm so sorry that I raised you as a boy because I think it really contributed to you being gay. And I looked at him, I was all like, you were treating me as a boy? I thought you were just treating me as an equal. And that made it more apparent in my life that the people who loved me the most did see a difference in the values that you teach boys and the values that you teach girls. And I can't fault them because they are literally products of their environment. They were given no other tools. And I am grateful that they immigrated to the United States because now I have those tools. I have them better than my mother could, better than my father can understand, and I am a better person for it. See, modern womanhood is about accepting yourself and loving yourself. Modern womanhood is about being successful. It's about contending with other people. It's about staying in the front of the race or the back of the race, your choice. It's about choice. And that's what's sort of unique. Now, I think a lot of people, humans, overcorrect. So we saw that there was a discrepancy with men and women, and we tried to overcorrect. It's going to happen with every movement, every civil rights movement. There's always overcorrection. And that's just a part of being human and being part of a tribe and then a community. So one of the reasons I wanted to reach out to our community here on YouTube was to hear from your voices. So I asked women in the audience, to reach out and share their stories. I gave you a slew of questions to answer, and some of you had great insight into what it was to be a woman, how you felt as bi women experiencing the Rita Ora song, and just how you felt being a woman, period.
So in BDSM, I am a switch. So I top and I bottom. I submit, which is a new thing, and I dominate, depending on the individual to who I'm playing with. But when I'm dominating, when I am topping, it's completely different because it's a completely different mindset and it's intoxicating. It's incredible. It's an incredible feeling because I'm in control. It doesn't matter what's going on in my life, in the bottom or the S-type's life. It doesn't matter because at that point in time, regardless if it's 24/7 or if it's just for that one scene, I'm in control and I want to make sure everyone's happy afterwards. There might be some screaming and some uncomfortable noises for a little bit, but everyone's going to be happy at the beginning and at the end. The end particularly because it's always good to have a cathartic beat down or one to where it's not fully sometimes the bottom doesn't even know that they're going through something, and then afterwards, I've had that happen, didn't know that he needed to have a good cry, and then afterwards he felt so much better because of what happened. And I help make that happen. Being able to allow people to process their feelings through pain, and let alone that I get to hurt them, absolutely. I will do that 100% all the time. Well, maybe not because I'm a switch.
Hi, so first, some basic information about me. I'm 18, I identify as female, I'm from Germany, and I identify as bisexual. So I'm a cis female, so I lived my whole life as being female and female identifying. And growing up, being female did influence my life to a certain part. I don't think being a woman is what I am, but rather being a woman is part of what I am. So I wouldn't identify my whole life onto being female, but rather part of it has definitely something to do with it. I do think that my life would have be different. I also identify as a feminist, as an intersectional feminist to be specific. Not necessarily because of own experiences, but rather because when I look at the whole of different women in different countries, but also in our society, I do think that there's still work to do for equality. Yeah, I think that's kind of my take on it.
We were given a piece to read to accompany this to help inspire us. It was written by Judith Gloria Bear, and she says that asking someone to describe gender is like asking a fish to describe water. It's something that's really difficult to do. It's all around us. It's a constant. We're never away from it, and we're never not affected by it. I was 19 when I wrote this piece, and I'm now 23. So a lot can change in 4 years, and it has for me. I've now been a carer for 3 of those. I know that as a woman, I'm more likely to bear a burden of care. There are very few universal truths, but statistically that is one of them. Women, regardless of their background, are more likely to bear the burden of care over men. You think things like this would make me bitter about what it means to be a woman or about femininity, but the truth is it doesn't, and not for a second. I'm a woman, I identify strongly as a woman, and that's all there is to it.
How do you think your life has differed from being a woman? It's been a lot more difficult, I think. It's been bittersweet. I've experienced things that were disadvantages of being a woman and advantages of being a woman, and I've learned how to embrace my femininity, my womanhood, my womanness in my body.
What does it mean to be a girl? Well, I am a transgender female, as you can tell. And to me, what it means is it's the meaning of life.
I think what's more than apparent is that we all experience existence uniquely and differently, and that should never be wrong. What should be taken into consideration is what communities you live in, what tribes you're a part of, and what ways you want to exist in the world, and what ways your tribe or community are stopping you from existing. And then, do you need to leave that tribe, or do you need to rearrange the tribe? And that's kind of the weirdness of being a human, is that we're all born into communities, and then we need to decide as we get older, do I change communities? Do I stay in my community but help shift my community? Do I invite people outside of the community to join the community? What do I do? How do I maintain happiness, contentedness, and of course, inner peace in order to achieve, those beautiful things? What do I do to achieve them? One of the hardest questions I think anyone will ever have to answer is how they as a blank feel, or what makes them as a blank feel empowered, or what, you know what I mean? So example, how do I as a woman explain womanhood or feeling like a woman? Why am I so protective of women? I am fiercely protective of women. I'm like violently protective of women. I think women are the most beautiful creatures to ever step onto the earth, and that's because I am a woman, I think. I think that's why. Like, wouldn't that make sense that I would be fiercely protective of me? So I love women. I think women as a general whole add and contribute beautiful things to existence. I mean, the way we form groups, the way we, raise money for charities, the way we advocate for ourselves, like, women are just beautiful creatures. And that's not to say that people who aren't women aren't these things, but since we're talking about women, that's, bear with me here. Now, what's interesting is Chimamanda, who of course, Nigerian feminist. She's beautiful, wonderful, fierce. I adore her. I adore her because she saw something wrong with the world and wanted to make a difference, not only for her, but for people who are like her. And because of that, she has experiences that are unique and beautiful and should be listened to. The thing that sets her apart, though, from, let's say, feminists in the United States is that for her, things like race are very different conversations. Things like gender are very different conversations. She actually was under fire I think within the last couple of years, for saying that trans women and cis women experience womanhood differently.
Does it matter how you've arrived at being a woman? I mean, for example, if you're a trans woman who grew up identifying as a man, who grew up enjoying the privileges of being a man, does that take away from becoming a woman? Are you any less of a real woman?
So when people talk about, are trans women, my feeling is trans women are trans women. And I think if you've lived in the world as a man, with the privileges that the world accords to men, and then switch gender, it's difficult for me to accept that then we can equate your experience with the experience of a woman who has lived from the beginning in the world as a woman and who has not been accorded those privileges that men are. I don't think it's a good thing to conflate everything into one. I don't think it's a good thing to talk about women's issues being exactly the same as the issues of trans women. What I'm saying is that gender is not biology. Gender is sociology.
Now, the interesting thing about this statement is that she's technically right? Because trans women, though women, and I protect them fiercely, you are so welcome in my communities as women, do experience and have a different story. And I think that should be acknowledged and praised. If trans women were like cis women and experience womanhood like cis women, then we're assuming that trans women's plights are similar to cis women in every way when they're not. You experience trials and tribulations that I as a cis woman will never experience, and that is why I, based off Feminism 101, do have privileges that trans women do not. So to say that trans women and cis women experience womanhood the same is a false statement. Hey guys, it's been a few hours, but I was editing and I realized I left out an important point, or at least an example. When Chimamanda is talking about trans women, she's talking about the experiences they've held. A lot of counter arguments to Chimamanda's point was that a lot of trans women transition early, and therefore the world perceives them as women early, and therefore they are treated and therefore equal to how other women experience existence. I just wanted to give this as an example. If there is a trans woman in tech, and at the age of 34 she gets an award for being like a woman in tech, but she transitioned at the age of 30 and she reached success in tech by the age of 29, then all the experiences she had gained throughout her life were from the perception of her being male. And therefore, the awards she had gotten were not of those of a woman, but those of a man. At least the ones she accounted or earned, I guess, or were awarded to her between the ages of, before she transitioned, essentially, publicly, perceptionally. So that's, I think, what Chimamanda was saying. When I heard that, that's what I heard. And don't you think it's fascinating how some people hear that, and then some people hear, she thinks I'm not a real woman, and that's like an issue. That's a total issue, because we're talking about completely different things. Totally different things. And I just wanted to add that for food for thought. Okay, guys, enjoy the rest of the video. But interestingly enough, some of my favorite trans activists had problems with her statements.
Now, these conversations are always frustrating for me because cis people have a tendency of boiling down transgender experiences into one born in the wrong body and then changed it narrative that doesn't quite reflect my own story. I can confidently say that I've never felt trapped in my own body, but I struggle to understand and deal with how other people wanted to see my body and by proxy, my gender. I transitioned at a very young age, and before I even understood that I was transgender, people often read me as cis. This was frustrating to me in my denial phase, but it became a great source of privilege for me throughout my transition. So I don't have the story that many cisgender people like to tell of the married father who after kids and divorce decided to become the woman who they'd always known themselves to be. I was a little androgynous kid who today only ever knows an adulthood as a woman. This is where cis people rush to refute my lived experiences. There are differences, but in my personal experience, our differences are slight in comparison to our similarities. I spent a lot of time trying to separate my experiences from cis women's experiences. And at a certain point, I realized that a lot of the things that I dealt with weren't about my transness. They were about my femaleness. Despite what any anonymous troll has to say in the comment section of this video, I've been warmly accepted as a woman my entire adult life. It's the only experience I truly know. It's the only way that I've ever been seen.
Now, Kat Black is a prominent woman here on YouTube and is a very important voice to the trans community and women of color community and person community in general. I find her ideas, though sometimes we conflict, very, very stimulating, and I appreciate her presence on the internet. Now, what's interesting about Kat Black, though, is she is saying that because at a young age she experienced being perceived as a woman by society, she still experienced womanhood in a similar way. And though I say that that's almost true, because the way that humans interact with one another is the perception of who a human is, I would say that wouldn't that lead us to conclude that both Chimamanda and Kat Black have really, really good points? See, what's interesting, and Natalie, who I love with all my heart, another trans activist YouTuber who is a fantastic, wonderful human, who is literally so fierce and beautiful. I cannot wait to see you in a couple weeks, girl. We are going to have makeup tutorials up the yin yang. I'm so stoked. She made a video where she talked about the perception of what is. And in her video, she did make that statement, and she brought up the fact that people are attracted to the perception of a human, not their genitals, not what's underneath their clothes, not the details. This, in my head, is the lust of womanhood. It's something that women do experience on a very different level, which, and I know everyone experiences it, but just from a woman's perspective, I do feel that often I am experiencing, and people are experiencing me by my presentation. How many people today are going to take qualms or already have commented before the video is finished that my chest is out and that's uncomfortable for people? How many people are uncomfortable with the fact that I'm wearing a bra as a shirt, because this bra is a shirt as far as anyone is concerned. I wear it out in public like this. I don't put anything over it. I don't wear bras as bras. I wear them as shirts. And the reason is because they look like shirts. This is way too pretty to be covered, right? But that makes some people uncomfortable. Is it the perception that as a woman I appear more slutty? Is it the perception as a woman I appear more loose that makes people uncomfortable? Is it the fact that it's just like boobs are out there and that makes people uncomfortable? But it's a perception, okay? Now, they don't know anything about me. They don't know that I'm cis. They don't know that I'm trans. They don't know that I'm anything. I could be anything. And that's what we're trying to say, is that the experiences people have are all unique, different, and valid. And that is the issue I take when people tell me, well, this is how blank works, and this is how it must work for everybody. Because as a woman, we experience things very vastly different. And because of that, it does matter. Our backgrounds, the details to our existence, how we perceive other people, how bitter we've become, because I have had moments of complete bitterness, how much peace we've come to, how good we feel in our bodies, how comfortably we can talk about our faults. All of these things are an accumulation of time spent and introspection had. They're not going to happen easily, and they're not going to happen quickly unless you're very lucky and wise in your early 20s. But I'm nearing 30, and I have scratched the surface of self-awareness, and I am so stoked to see what else I discover about myself and the world around me. But that means I have to acknowledge that every time I have an idea of what someone is or who someone is, I have to take a step back and remind myself, like, but are they? And the only way you're going to find out is asking genuine questions into a person's existence. Tell me your story. What genuinely sets you apart from the other 7 billion? Because you are genuinely a unique person. And yes, our actions and tendencies and likes tend to overlap, and so therefore we can be put into groups and bubbles. But even within those bubbles, we are still unique individuals, right? And so womanhood feels like that for me. And this is where we jump into queerness, because that is individualistic. So when everyone reacted to my love of the song Girls by Rita Ora, they were upset because it didn't reflect their version of bisexuality or queerness. It might never. It might in some ways. Mary Lambert has a really good song about gay relationships that I thought was pretty fucking wholesome and beautiful. But it only shared one perspective on love and intimacy. For some people, bisexuality is not biromanticism. For some people, sleeping around is their sexual orientation. For other people, it's demisexual, so they only are attracted to people they really genuinely love. It's so different and so vast. So to limit womanhood to one thing is a fault. We are not one thing, we are many things. I want to thank you guys for watching and being a part of this and exploring this with me. I want to thank you for being here and for allowing me an opportunity to kind of share my ideas with you. I am so open to hearing from many of you. I want to hear from you guys. I want to have that weird conversation. And I want to have it with truth, objective truth if we can. And then I want to understand why we see truth so differently, and why and how that breeds conflict, and why we end up at this kind of juncture in our existence where we're constantly battling it out. All right, guys, thanks for watching. Have a great day. See you next video. Bye.